Gonna try to read it for you today. Flow Chart by John Ashbery. 1. Still in the published city, but not yet, overtaken by a new form of despair, I ask the diagram. Is it the foretaste of pain it might easily be, or an emptiness so sudden it leaves the girders wanging in the absence of wind, the sky milk blue and astringent? We know life is so busy, but a larger activity shrouds it, and this is something we can never feel except occasionally in small signs put up to warn us, and is soon expunged, in part or wholly. Sad grows the river god as he oars past us, downstream without our knowing him. For if, he reasons, he can be overlooked, then to know him would be to eat him, ingest the name he carries through time to set down, finally, on a strand of rotted hulks. And those who sense something squeamish in his arrival know enough not to look up from the page they are reading, the plated lines that extend like a bronze chain to eternity. It seems I was reading something. I have forgotten the sense of it, or what the small role of the central poem made me want to feel. No matter. The words, distant now and mitred glint. Yet not one ever escapes the forest of agony and pleasure that keeps them in a solution that has become permanent through inertia. The force of meaning never extrudes. And the insects, of course, don't mind. I think it was at that moment he knowingly, and in my own interests, took back from me the slow-flowing idea of flight, now too firmly channeled, its omnipresent reminders etched too deeply into my forehead, its crass grievances and greetings, a class apart from the wonders every man feels, whether alone in bed or with a lover, or beached with the shells on some atoll. And if solitude swallow us up at times, it is only later that the idea of its permanence sifts into view. Yeah, later, and perhaps only occasionally and only much later, stands from dawn to dusk, just as the plaintive sound of the harp of the waves is always there as a backdrop to conversation and conversion, even when most forgotten, and cannot make sense of them. But he knows the familiar, unmistakable thing, and that gives him courage. As day expires and evening marshals its hosts in preparation for the long night to come. And the horoscopes flung back, all we had meant to keep there, our meaning for us, yet how different the sense when another speaks it. How cold the afterthought that takes us out of time. For a few moments, just as we were beginning to go with the fragile pensions mother love taught us, and transports us to a stepping stone far out at sea. So no matter what the restrictions, admonitions, premonitions that trellised us early, supporting this artificial espaliered thing we have become, by the same token no subsequent learning shall deprive us, it seems, no holy sophistication loosen the bands of blessed decorum, or present salvation, our hope for years to come. Only let that river not beseech its banks too closely, upbraid and swamp its levees, for though the flood is always terrible, much worse are the painted monsters born later out of the swift-flowing alluvial mud. And when the time for the breaking of the law is here, be sure it is to take place in the matrix of our everyday thoughts and fantasies, our wonderment at how we got from there to here. In the unlashed eye of noon, these and other terrible things are written, yet it seems at the time as mild as sowing of wavelets in a reservoir. Only the belated certainty comes to matter much, I suppose, and when it does, comes to seem as immutable as roses. Meanwhile, a god has bungled it again. Early on was a time of seeming, golden eggs that hatched into regrets, a snowflake whose kiss burned like an enchanter's poison, yet it all seemed good in the growing dawn. The breeze that always nurtures us, no matter how dry, how filled with complaints about time, and the ether, the weather, the air, pointed out a way that diverged from the true way without negating it, to arrive at the same result by different spells, so that no one was wiser for knowing the way we had grown almost unconsciously into a cube of grace that was to be a permanent shelter, Let the book end there, some few said, but that was of course impossible. The growth must persist into areas darkened and dangerous, undermined by the curse of that death breeze, until one is handed a skull as a birthday present, and each closing paragraph of the novella is underlined, "To be continued," and that there should be no peace in the present, no sleep save in glimpses of the future on the crystal ball's thick bubble-like surface. No you and me unless we are together. Only then does he mumble confused words of affection at us as the barberry bleeds close against the frost. Scarlet innocence, confused miracle for us for what we have done to others and to ourselves. There is no parting, there is only the fading, guaranteed by the label which lasts forever. This much the gods divulged before they became too restless, too preoccupied with other cares to see into the sole fact the present allows, along with much ribbon, much icing, and pretended music. But we can't live with them in their day. The air, though pure, is too dense, and afterwards when others come up and ask what was it like, one is too amazed to behave strangely. The future is extinguished, the world's colored paths all lead into my mouth, and I drop, humbled, eating from the red clay floor, and only then does inspiration come. Late, yet never too late. It's possible, it's just possible, that the gods' claims fly out the windows as soon as they are opened, are erased from the accounting. If one is alone, it matters less than to others embarked on a casual voyage into the promiscuity of dreams. Yet I am always the first to know how he feels. The inventory of the silent auction doesn't promise much. One chewed cactus, an air mattress, a verbatim report. Sandals, the massive transcriptions with which he took unforgivable liberties. Hell, I'd sooner join the project farther ahead, retaining all benefits, but one is doomed, repeating oneself, never to repeat oneself. You know what I mean? If in the interval false accounts have circulated, why, one is at least unaware of it, and can live one's allotted arc of time in feasible unconsciousness, watching the linen dresses of girls with a wreath of smoke to come home to. There is nothing beside the familiar doormat to get excited about. Yet when one goes out in loose weather, the change is akin to choir singing in the distance, nebulous with fear and love. Sometimes one's own hopes are realized, and life becomes a description of every second of the time it took. Conversely, some are put off by the sound of legions milling about. One cultivates certain smells, is afraid to leave the charmed circle of the anxious room, lest uncommitted atmosphere befall, and the oaks are seen to be girdled with ivy. A lackey said, "What stressful sound." More of him another time, but now you, in the ivory frame, have stripped yourself one by one of your earliest opinions, polluted in any case by bees, and stand radiant in the circle of our lost, unhappy youth. Oh, my friend, that knew me before I knew you, and when you came to me, knew it was forever. Here there would be no break. Only I was so ignorant, I forgot what it was all about. You chided me for forgetting, and in an instant I remembered everything. The schoolhouse, the tent meeting. And I came closer until the day I wrote my name firmly on the ruled page. That was a time to come, and all happy crying in memory placed the stone in the magic box and covered it with wallpaper. It seemed our separate lives could continue separately for themselves and shine like a single star. I never knew such happiness. I never knew such happiness could exist. Not that the dark world was removed or brightened, but each thing in it was slightly enlarged, and in so seeming became its true cameo self, a liquid thing to be held in a hollow of a hand like a bird. More formal times would come, of course, but the abstract good sense would never drown in the elixir of this private sorrow that would always sing to itself in good times and bad, an example to one's consciousness, an emblem of correct behavior in darkness or underwater. How unshifting those secret times, and how stealthily they grew. It was going to take forever just to get through. The first act, yet the scenery, a square of medieval houses, gardens with huge blue and red flowers, and solemn birds that dwarfed the trees they sat on, need never have given way to the fumes and crevices of the high glen. The point is, one was going to do to it what mattered to us, and all would be correct, as in a painting, and that would never ache for a frame, but dream on as nonchalantly as we did. Who could have expected a dream like this to go away? For there are some that are the web on which our waking life is painstakingly elaborated. There are real, bustling things there, and the burgomaster of success stalks back and forth, directing everything with the small motion of a finger. But when it did come, the denouement, we were off drinking in some restaurant, too absorbed, too eternally, expectantly happy to be there or care. That inspiration came later, in sleep while it rained, urgently, so that lines of darkness interfered with the careful arrangement of the dream's disguise, no takers. Anyway, sleep itself became this chasm of repeated words, of shifting banks of words, rising like steam out of some place into something. Forget the promises the stars made you. They were half-stoned and, besides, are twinned to no notion that can have any impact on our way of thinking, as crabbed now as at any time in the past. A forlorn park stood before us, but there was no way to want to enter it, since the guards had abandoned their posts to slate-gray daylight flowing into your heart as though it were a blotter, confounding or negating the rare survival of wit into our century. These, at any rate, are my children, she intoned, of whom I divest myself so as to fit into the notch of infinity, as defined by a long arc of crows returning to the distant coppice. All's aglow, but we see by it that some mortal material was included in the glorious compound, that next to nothing can prevent its mudslide from sweeping over us while it renders the pitted earth smooth and pristine, and something like one's original idea of it, only so primitive it can't understand us. Meanwhile, the coat I wear, woven of consumer products, asks you to pause and inspect the still fertile ground of our once valid compact with the ordinary and the true. It wants out, and we shall get it even with decreased services and an increased number of spot checks, since all of it, ourselves included, is in our own interest to speak up for and deny when the proper moment arrives. Now nothing further remains to be done except to sleep and pray, saving the pieces for a slightly later time when they shall be recognized as holy remnants of the burnished mirror in which the Almighty One saw himself and wept, realizing how all his prophecies had come true for his people at last, and no one was any wiser for it as they walked the wide, shadowless streets with no eyelids or memory when it came to intersecting the itineraries of other similarly blessed creatures, blessed for having no name, no preconceived strategies, unless they lay underground too unprofitable to dig up until the requisite technologies had been developed some decades down the road, and nodding as though in acknowledgement of an acquaintance one doesn't remember, yet is not sure of ever having formally renounced either. Was it on land or at sea that the bird first came to one, many miles from the nearest anything? What we are to each other is both less urgent and more perturbing, having no discernible root, no raison d'etre, or at least flowing backward into an origin like the primordial soup it's so easy to pin anything on, like a carnation to one's lapel. So it seems we must stay in an uneasy relationship, not quite fitting together, not precisely friends or lovers, though certainly not enemies. If the buoyancy of the spongy terrain on which we exist is to be experienced as an ichor, not a commentary on all that is missing from the reflection in the mirror, did I say that? Can this be me? Otherwise the treaty will seem premature, the peace unearned, and one might as well slink back into the solitude of the kennel for the blunder to be read as anything but willful, self-indulgent, and meanwhile everything around us is already prepared for this resolution. The temperature, the season are exactly right for it all not to be awash with the sentiments expelled from some impossibly distant situation. Some episode from your childhood nobody even knows about and even you can't remember accurately. It is time for the long beds then, and the extra hours to be spent in them, but surely somebody can. Find something spontaneous to say before it all fizzles, before the incandescent tongues are slaked in mud, and the tender yellow roots of the willow dry up, instead of maturing, having concluded that the moment is inappropriate, the heroes gone to their rest, and all the plain folk of history foundered in the subjective reading of their lives as expendable, the stuff of ordinary heresy, shards of common crockery, interesting only because unearthed long after the time had come for a decision on what to do at the very moment they disappeared into timelessness, one of innumerable such tramping exits that no one hears, so long as they may be promptly and justly forgotten, subtracted like the soul we never knew we had, and replaced with something young and easier, climate of any day and of all days, postmillenarian. Just so, some argue, some still are nurtured by their innocence, a wanton formula a nursemaid gave them. They grow up to be slim and tall, but often it seems something is lacking, some point of concentration around which a person can collect itself and be neither conscious nor uncaring, be neutral. And when the pitcher is emptied of milk, it is not refilled but washed and put away on a shelf. Conversations are initiated haltingly under the leaves around an outdoor table, but they insist on nothing and are remembered only as disquieting examples of how life might be in that other halting yet prosperous time, when games of strength were put away and each guest rises abruptly from the table, a star at his or her shoulder. For then, in smeared night, no blotch or defect can erase it, the wonderful greeting you heard in the morning and heard yourself reply to. But at times such as these late ones, a moaning in copper beaches is heard of regret, not for what had happened or even what could conceivably have happened, but for what never happened and which therefore exists, as dark and transparent as a dream from nowhere, a dream with no place to go, all dressed up with no place to go, that an axe menaces off and on throughout eternity, or ships, lands which no one sees, islands scattered like pebbles across the immense surface of the ocean. This is what it is to believe and not see, to implore dreaming, then to arrive home, by cunning, stricken and exhausted, a framed picture of oneself. The ads didn't see you. The ads didn't tell you this. They were too busy with their own professional sleight of hand to notice those farther out in deep water. When such destined wretch as I washed headlong from an onboard, decorating the maelstrom with someone's, I wish I knew whose, notion of what is right or cute. Soon the dark chairs and tables stand out sharply in front of a strange, green-stripped walls. Gulls circle in the sky. Smoke from piles of old tires set alight at strategic points throughout the city sifts through the crack where the pane doesn't quite join the sill. Is this, I ask you, a mute entreaty on the part of some well-intentioned but shy deity meant to take the temperature of the lives being squandered by the few left here below? Ask rather why the clock slows down a little more each day, necessitating double, triple, and even quadruple tintillations in order for its fundamentally banal intentions to be elucidated, so that one may settle down to enjoy the usufruct of this sparse, shattering seconds, the while looking forward to retiring at 90 on a comfortable income without ruining the day one first took up the odd gambit that has projected us into a lifetime of self-loathing and shallow interests. One lives thus, plucking a mean sort of living from the rubbish heaps of history, unaware that the parallel daintiness of the lives of the rich, like fish in an ocean whose bottom is dotted with the rusted engines and debris of the long-forgotten wrecks, unfolds, yes, and I in greater depths than he, I suppose. Yet it doesn't seem to help deliver one back either to the other. After all, sane and helpful blank square one is always setting out from, having in the meantime forgotten those other percepts, sane and insane, that intrude as soon as one begins to think about anything at all. It is always on the rim of some flesh pot briefly mentioned in the Bible one is seen to squirm, a pinned worm, so that one is pitted against one others as against oneself. Lonesome, hungry, and a little bit thirsty until the day of doom, universally misconstrued as a time of relief, and pillars of dust rising straight up out of the desert valleys where one's feet takes one, and all that mythology of broken tracks, jettisoned equipment, and the long uninhabited wadi whose water and trough is merely mud now, and a few puddles of camel stale materializes. Latest reports show that the government still controls everything, but the location of the blonde captive has been pinpointed thanks to urgent needling from the backwoods constituency, and the population is alive and well. Can we dwell on any of it? Our privacy ends where the clouds begin, just here, just at this bit of an anonymity on the seashore. And we have the right to be confirmed, just as animals or even plants do, provided we go away and leave every essential piece of the architecture of us behind. Surely then, what we work for must be met with approval sometime, even though we haven't the right to issue any such thing. There are caves, and almost none of them has been explored yet. That doesn't give us much to go on, yet we insistently cry that someone else's rondo is already being played, and that over and over. So how come nobody does anything about it, relaxes us in our shoes and tells us about bedtime? Surely in my younger days people acted differently about it. There was no barnstorming, just quiet people going about their business and not worrying too much about being rewarded at the end when it came down to that. No, we were wandering away, too busy for such things, toward the altar of, better yet, into the nave, whose fruit and flower decoration led unostentatiously and facilely into the outdoors it anticipated. No use just sitting around juicing the lemon, or the orange for that matter, as long as one was intending to get up and play again. And now that the time of reckoning nears, it wears a changed coat. Its color is brighter. No, but there must be some structural difference as well in the ordering of the colors and how they were laid on, only no one can conceivably care enough about this to talk about it. Well, I do, and can, but the unnice fractions almost always assert themselves above the din of this great city, and I have trouble remembering even my name, until some passing girl kindles its fancy, what my name was to me when I first began to think about other things. There is not postage for this boredom, either, really, so that it keeps returning might be said never to have gone away at all, except for the media with which it keeps getting compared. I say the other reaches tickle you when you have a chance, and all this time I thought he was only farting around, disinclined to have a serious opinion on anything, and even more so to give it vent or utterance. And my sight clears for the first time in 1,000 years, and it's true I can see up ahead where no one waits, and the long flags flap and droop the dust of sunsets, and so may it be forever and ever till we get it right. Mine's isn't the only option to show you how to escape or comfort you unduly, but with a little time and a little patience we shall make this thing work. Even though you thought everything you touched was doomed to fall apart or not start, time has a few surprises up its sleeve and deserves to be spat on for not having more. Or would, if it didn't, yet it does. There are promises clad with the finest silk you can imagine, and silver ornaments hitherto undreamed of, if only you can match them with something of equal lovingness and curiosity from your own secret collection. And of course this does take time. But in the end one senses it more richly bedizened than ever before, and in line for a promotion out of the ranks of utility into the narrow furrows of bliss and total sublimity, crystallized in good humor that took over early on in the century. Of course no one is aware of this yet, but give everybody time, even no-shows, and it will all flow backwards, that caparisoned night, a trial for some, and otherwise it all gets out into your childhood and the beach that was its launching pad before hunger and fears took over, even as delight fostered the notion that there was going to be enough for everybody, for children to pause and have a happy home. No one talks about Best to rest, sleep, and laugh about it to someone who no longer matters, and then you'll find that you are indeed in it and have been all along, only that the show was on a kind of treadmill, moving at the same leaden pace as your jokes and ambitions, which is why you never knew about it, therefore consented to some come along the way on this dangerous outing to the very sources of time. Don't excuse yourself. Nothing could. I've never really considered telling you. And now, he hated doing it. He wasn't sure why. And so just as the mirthless sequel was being disinterred, a feeling of rage came over him, but also of relief, because you couldn't do it now. They're lost somewhere out there between the trees and muck. Besides, all cars have them now, and the colorful glasses and telephones are there. He came for a fitting. It was proper and in its time, but no matter what you do, someone will be malevolent about it and try to stop you, though there is no stopping them. He came for the fitting and tried it on, and it fit just like that. What a laugh. Oh yes, she laughed out of the closet. I'll be there in a minute, dear. You see how fond of him she was? And he just took it, like most things. Change, pretzels. And she thought he was so good at it, it kind of faked her when the last windshield whizzed by and it was all over as though in a rush. And as meat is sung, and lips only slowly parted for the alphabet of night chimes to come clanging down like an immense ring of keys, so that with the gale-whipped morsel motion of itself that dogs us and all humans, and we never quite get out from under it, there is always a thread of it attached to you. And when you remove that, another one, as though magnetized, takes its place. Begorra, it was dumb to be in the pit with them. For them the sentence, ... But who knows what all they may have tried before? What avenues exhausted before it was time to mend and really be the interloper? For all its sparks, it was never considered dangerous. Everybody gets such ideas on occasion, and here was the little shot glass of night all ready to drink, and you spread out in it even before it radiates in you. It doesn't matter whether or not you like the striations, because in the time it takes to consider them, they will have merged. The rich man's house becomes a kettle, the wreath and the sink turn to something else, and still the potion holds prominent. And you want to see it, and to have it be talked about this way, not drool aimless compassion. So on that night we were almost boarded up, packed off to a vacation where, moreover, no men heard of it, only teenage girls and male adolescences with fruited complexions and scalps who were going to make it difficult for one should an occasion arise. But a funny thing happened. None of us were around to count, all incommensurate with our duties as we should forever be, and not wanting much training. The dark was like nectar that evening, rising in the mouth. You thought you had never heard so pretty a sound. And of course quietism was again broached, and that soon, and quite soon, the pink of the salmon ignited the way of the plover's egg and the black of old scarred metal. Then how it feels relaxes one's like a warm numbing bath, and her argument and yours and all of theirs. Why not just consider, or better yet, just hold on to them? For the speed of light is far away, and you, sooner or later, must return to a deteriorated situation, and placing your hand in the fire, say just what it means to you to be connected and over, and kiss the burning edges of the unfolded, stiff card, and be unable to avoid doing anything about it, or acknowledging it when we have passed, when all is past. And why did he, by what was he it? Why we push our little tails around and back and forth and so on, by which time it literally implodes. I mean, by then he was settling in and no one called his attention to it, and the repertoire of his groans is one glottal one. You'll feel the difference, and if it can't liberate itself from us, just turns to dust in the air, floating with a kind of negative majesty one thought one would not see again in one's life. But I had the horn. We had a deal we agreed on, yet no record of its existence is sketched, and I am all I am in the meanwhile, and 13,000 fucking miles away like a planter on his porch. And so I am unaware of the flambeau and possibly the stealth that brought me here and abandoned me. I'm awfully sorry, big boy, but my plans concern George and his wife over there by the other side of the lake, slipping into a nervous breakdown. And well, as you know, we sit here determined, not like the rind of the melon, but not liking to say anything about it in the miraculous dawn that, gasp, gathers us into its stocking. A pervasive air about him of studious lyricism avoided us, and he turned ever so quickly to the hen-house, and off in the open was seen running, and then, so easy, was probably not recorded, except between the trees of a clearing. And who, what patron saint, will pick up the pieces of the glittering lighthouse and restore us to them in a kind of Roman calm that we were meant for, and suddenly, shit! It's the fire, and glass breaking everywhere, and it's as though you were never born, but you must somehow drink a toast to the small nucleus of watch springs or confusion that lords it over you now, but will be less than an unconsumed coal among ashes, soon into the dryers fixed. And then all out and along the cinder path that led so alluringly down to the bayou, all we can know is hope and fevers for coming tomorrow of saffron and moist rage under the corner of somebody's hat that wasn't meant to like you. Me, I rest in the sun regardless. We saw a car drive on to the city that is the password. Ice cubes played tag up and down my spine. I'm here to collect the reward. Obey my every command, no matter how strange it may seem, otherwise we'll have been banished before the judgment. Not know how fortunate we were in our old simplicity. Other vanished zinnias were interviewed, and nobody had anything, good or bad, to say about us, which doesn't cause any tears, yet one wonders, what if one were back there again? On whom might one rely? What distractions would be concocted for us if we had strayed? And who is the baron that manipulates our daily lives from afar? Why even depend on industry and innocence when the rebellion is growing in the ditch just outside? Who knows about us? Who ever did? Weren't we lying to ourselves when we thought we caught someone being just slightly interested in us one day? And if so, whose fault is it? That we came too late to an overgrown baseball diamond, and in the meantime Shax had vanished without a trace from the face of the globe, and now the evening star was combing her hair at the attic window, and no one is to blame. Just be calm. Don't rush. It's all over, or soon will be, or just was, in any other language sufficient to tell it in, just like it was.